Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first DHEP Self-Taught Exploring Perspective series. We'll be hosting this presentation series this fall. For this first one, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Manning to present for us today. I'll explain a little bit of his background. He was born and raised in New Zealand, where he received his bachelor's degree in engineering.
Engineering, yeah. University of Canterbury in 1990.
And then he moved to the United States for his PhD, which he received at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And during his PhD, he created, let's see if I can spell this, an atmospheric oxygen measurement was established in New Zealand, and has provided continuous documentation of those measurements since then. After receiving his PhD, he moved to Germany, where he worked with the Max Planck Institute of Biogeochemistry, where he led a group called the Tall Towers Group, which measured greenhouse gases in Germany,
Poland and Siberia.
Thank you. Germany, Poland, and Siberia. And then since 2006, he's been living in England and working here at the University of East Anglia. He also has done carbon-related atmospheric, he created the Carbon-Related Atmospheric Measures Lab, or CREM, and he is teaching the next generation of students about the urgency and importance crisis of climate change. He has been deaf since he was a year old, but attended mainstream schools, and unfortunately did not have the opportunity to learn New Zealand Sign Language. He wanted to mention that he did take ASL classes during his PhD, and was fortunate to meet Carol Patton and Tom Humphreys, as well as Rain Bosworth during his time in California. And he is especially proud of his deaf sister, Victoria Manning, who is a Gallaudet alumni and a strong advocate of the deaf and disabled communities in New Zealand. Victoria is currently working in the New Zealand Department of Health, focused on access and rights for all disabled people. So I am thrilled to welcome you up, Dr. Manning.
Thank you very much. So Dill mentioned how I set up measurements in New Zealand during my PhD. So my work is on climate change, and it's all about a long-term problem. There's a big difference between weather and climate. Weather is about what's happening today, yesterday, and tomorrow, but climate change is a long-term thing. So all of my work is about making measurements in the long term. So it was a little bit, you reminded me of some very bad thing, Dill, with respect to the New Zealand measurements, because just 2 months ago they stopped. After 24 years of measurements, they stopped because of no more money. So it was very sad. Okay. So Dill's already given a very nice introduction to me, but I anyway have a slide on kind of the same thing. So slightly more detail than Dill gave. So when I went deaf at the age of 1, nobody knew why. But worst of all is the doctors did not believe my parents that there was anything wrong with me. Back in those days, I'm quite old, so they could not test for hearing without you pushing a button. And a 1-year-old cannot push a button. So only when I started school at age 5, the teacher was saying, this guy's not hearing, there's something wrong. Then I finally got my first hearing aid 4 years later. So it's only because of my parents were so patient with me that I even learned how to speak. So yes, I attended mainstream schools and did not learn any sign language. There was only one deaf school in northern New Zealand, which was very far away, and at that time it was actually a very bad school. So I think my parents made the right decision for my education to send me to a normal school. But of course it meant I was very isolated because I was with hearing people who I couldn't really communicate with. And so my younger sister, as mentioned, she went deaf at age 4. So she had already learned to speak before, which was helpful. And this time the doctors, of course, believed my parents. And yeah, she's very famous in the deaf community, so I'm very proud of her. And she currently sits on the World Federation of the Deaf Board as a board member since 2019. So that's very cool. Also, as I think you don't know, was it Colorado? But yeah, I don't know. I moved to Colorado in 1991 when I was just 21. Wait a minute. No, I must have been 23. Keep my numbers. Moved to Colorado, USA, working as a lab technician. And then 2 years later, I moved to San Diego, still as a lab technician, and then I started a PhD. And that's also where I got to meet Rain Bolsworth, and became friends with her now since 30 years. So we've had a very, very long, good friendship. And as Liz mentioned, I arranged with her husband to come over here last year for her 50th birthday as a surprise. So I just showed up in their house, and Rain didn't even know I was coming. But we also did exactly the same thing when she turned 40 10 years before. I just showed up from England. I showed up in America for her birthday. So now we're thinking, what can we do for 60, because she will be expecting her. So we haven't solved that problem yet. Then after America, I moved to Germany in 2001 as a postdoc. And it was also a little bit of a personal experiment. They say that when you go to a foreign country, you learn the language because you're immersed in it. So my question was, can a deaf person learn a language when they're immersed in it? And the answer was no. After 5 years, I could read and write German, but I could not speak it. I could not get the pronunciation right. And Germans didn't understand me. So I said slightly wrong. They had no clue what I was saying. So I wrote it down and said, oh yes, of course. It was very, very frustrating for me. And I also couldn't hear it. I just could not pick up the sounds of German. In retrospect, the problem was this was before I got my cochlear implant. So I maybe need to repeat that experiment now that I have a cochlear implant, because it's so much better than a hearing aid. Anyway, so I needed to leave Germany because of the language problem. So I moved back to an English-speaking country, and I was lucky to get a job in Norwich, England in 2005. The next year, in 2006, my hearing got a lot worse from one day to the next, from 110 to 130 decibel hearing loss. Nobody knew why. Hearing aids cannot help you at 130 decibels. And so it was only in 2010 that I got my current cochlear implant. And for that sort of 4 or 5 years, I think back, I don't know how I survived that time, because I've never been so isolated in my life. I had no family. I couldn't speak with my colleagues at work. I had just moved to a new country, so I also didn't really have friends. So I don't know how. Somehow, obviously I'm here, so somehow I survived. And the cochlear implant really transformed my life to be able to communicate with the hearing world again. So that's a little bit about my personal life. So then my career, which again Dill has also mentioned briefly, I got a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Chemical and Process Engineering in 1990. The reason I chose that degree is because my father is a climate scientist, and I did not want to do the same thing as my father. So I was trying to do something different, but I hated it. They were teaching me to go and work on an oil refinery. And at this time I was becoming an environmentalist, and this was the worst thing I could possibly think of to do. So I finished the degree. I only just passed my classes, but I did get the degree, and then wanted to do something different, so I became a lab technician, first in New Zealand, and then the reason, by the way, why I got to go to Boulder, Colorado is because my father had a sabbatical year in Boulder, and so the colleague I was working for in my summer job in New Zealand, he got me a job also in Boulder, Colorado, so I could follow my parents. They stayed for 1 year. I didn't leave. I stayed for 10, and had a great time working in these labs. And then I continued on to do a PhD for the same person who I had been working for as a lab technician in the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego, California. I don't know if you've ever seen this place, but I took 7 years to do my PhD, which is a long time. And all the people I meet, they give me a hard time about how long I took until they visit Scripps. If you visit this place, like, oh my God, how did you finish? Because the beach is 100 meters away. It's the best swimming beach in San Diego. People are surfing there every day of the year. You know, it's a wonderful climate, not just in summer, but also in winter. So it's like, suddenly, instead of giving me a hard time for taking 7 years, people are like, impressed I finished it all. So what my subject was on, temporal variability, you can read it so you don't have to sign it. Temporal variability of atmospheric oxygen from both continuous measurements and fast sampling network. Tools for studying the global carbon cycle. Do not have a title this long, it's a huge mouthful. Then, as I said, I moved to Germany as a postdoc and then group leader at a place called the Max Planck Institute for Biogeochemistry. It was actually in the former East Germany, which had been communist, you know, run under Russia effectively, and the wall, the Berlin Wall had fallen down 10 years before, but there was still a lot of transition and change. So it was quite an exciting, interesting time to be living in Germany. Then I had to leave because of the language. So at first I was what's called an advanced research fellow. I just did research for 5 years. And then in 2010, I became an associate professor doing both research and teaching. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So that's my background, both personal and professional. Anyone have any questions on that or no? Yes?
What group leader, what is group leader? What is that role?
Yeah, I don't know. The Max Planck Institute is a very small organization, so they don't have official titles. But I was, instead of giving, maybe the best way to explain it is to say who was I leader of. So I had 3 PhD students and 4 technicians and 1 postdoc at that time.
Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you for explaining. I am wondering, since you did 7 years at the Scripps Institute, I'm wondering how was the experience there in terms of access services, availability for you as a deaf person? Did you feel friendly and welcome?
So, as I said, that's when I met Rain, who was doing a PhD at the same time, and she had an interpreter for everything she wanted. But I didn't know sign language. So, you know, what access was available to me? Nothing, basically. Maybe there was note takers, but nobody told me about that option. I had never heard of such an option, so I didn't ask. I did, as I think Bill also mentioned, I did take ASL classes during my PhD. My supervisor was actually not happy about me doing that. He wanted me to just stay in the lab doing research, but I ignored him and took my ASL classes for 2 years. So I got kind of, you know, I can know a little bit of sign language, but never fluent. And because of the pressure from my work, I could not become fluent. And then, of course, I left USA, and the only time I do signing now is when I come to visit Rain here once every 2 years. I don't sign to anybody else, not even my sister. My sister now has a cochlear implant too, and she had all of her family. She has a husband and 2 children. They're all hearing, so they don't really sign in their household. So I don't sign the period. But also, she knows New Zealand Sign Language, which has no connection to American Sign Language. She went to Gallaudet for 2 years, so she used to know ASL. So for some years, we would converse a little bit in ASL, but mine was never very good, and she just kept forgetting ASL. So to answer your question, I had no access support.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question related to what you mentioned that you had a hard time to speak German. but you're able to read and write German. So how can you achieve effective communication while being a group leader at the
good question. The institute was bilingual, so everyone spoke English except for the secretaries. And probably 1/3 of the students and staff were actually foreigners. So English was the main language that was spoken in the institute. So where my problem was living in Germany was difficult, but working in Germany was actually okay because it was all English.
So I'm wondering, can you read and write German? Did you learn it there, or did you learn it before? And how did you learn it when you were there?
So, good question. I started on a fellowship which I've been told you do the same thing here at Rochester. When you're here in Doctorate, you give them an intensive ASL class. I had an intensive German class, I think, for 3 weeks when I arrived. Which, it helped, but again, because of being deaf, I progressed, half the speed of everybody else. And then after 3 weeks, it was finished. And then I remember getting my own German private tutor, who I paid for. She was actually a university student there, and I was just trying to get her to teach me how to say these sounds. There's one sound, CH. I would try 1,000 times to say the sound. I couldn't get it right. I said it again and again and again. And one time I might say it right. Yes, like that, she said. And I do it again, and I don't get it the same. I mean, it was so frustrating. I just could not make the sound. It was coming from the back of the throat. There's nothing on the lips. I just could not learn this sound. So it was impossible. I'm sure you guys probably had similar experiences. Right. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I probably take a couple more minutes to have the students introduce themselves, so that way you might have questions for them as well, for the rest of the session.
Yeah, okay.
So, I'm going to start with Hayden.
Hayden Orr, and I'm a 3rd-year student. I'm here because I like research, so. Thank you. Ulysses, and this is my sign name. I'm an environmental science major, and I want to work at Scripps. That's my goal, my future goal. For marine biology. And with the Bridges program, I'm learning all the skills I'll need in order to be successful with my PhD. I'm Savannah. This is my sign name. I'm a 1st year's master's student, and I worked under Rain as well. And I hope to achieve a PhD as well in the future. My name's Adrena. I'm a 2nd-year master's student in human-computer interaction. I worked with Rain in her play lab, researching on deaf children, code is how they receive or are able to perceive language, and learning ASL from technology like an iPad. I'm hoping to get a master's almost this semester, soon, getting ready. And I plan to go on to a PhD as well.
Hi, I'm Tony, and I am majoring in psychology, hoping to graduate this spring. And I've been working in the DML lab here at DHEP.
third year interpreting major, and I'm gonna get the name again. Tony, thank you. That's the sign name. And I've worked here for the summer of 22, and I'm a research assistant, student research assistant. Everyone else?
Hello, my name is Hannah. Yes, and I know exactly what you're talking about with that CH sound. That's how you pronounce my name, so you gotta get that deep throatiness. I'm a 4th year environmental science major, and I am also in the BS-MS program. I am so excited to meet you because you have taught all of my classes they teach about you. And I'm always saying, yes, he's deaf, I know about him, he's deaf. And so I just think that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm really excited.
During classes, she's always saying, hey, I know he's deaf, I know he's deaf. Very excited.
Okay. Rain did give me a sign name, so you guys want to choose your sign names, and so this is my sign name. From Rain. And one more thing about Rain, so as Dill mentioned, I gave my lab in England a name called CRAM Lab, C-R-A-M, which stands for Carbon-Related Atmospheric Measurements. And if you see my lab, it's very small and crowded, so it's CRAM. So I was very proud of this acronym. But then Rain comes along with an acronym called PLAY. So she's got the best acronym ever for a lab. Okay, so let's move on to why we're here, I guess. So because it's sort of a small group, I just thought we'd have an informal question and answer session. So I want to start off with some questions to ask you guys. And here's my first one. Thinking about the Amazon scale, a star rating 1 to 5. On a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think the climate change problem is? So how maybe people can put up their hands or five. What do you guys think? Lots of fives. Okay.
Good question here.
Yeah.
So 5 you're saying is the most important,
yes.
Is that correct? We just wanted to clarify, it's 5.
It's the same as Amazon. What's the same for Amazon? Amazon. Same as Amazon.
Yep.
Okay, so then Andrew's answer, 5, same as you. And I deliberately wrote up here climate change problem, but actually I think the better wording is climate crisis or climate emergency, and even an existential crisis for humans. So I got a good audience here. No climate denialists. But as I mentioned before about weather versus climate, the problem with this crisis is that you guys realize, but the general public do not really understand the problem because it's a slow burn problem. Weather is variable from day to day, and most people don't understand the difference between weather and climate. The other reason why it's such a big problem is the fossil fuel industry has been on a decades-long, extremely effective campaign against climate scientists. These guys have so much money, it's phenomenal, and they have a lot more money than scientists actually, to spread this information. Okay, what issues are more important to you or society than climate change? So, have a little think about that.
Accessibility.
Accessibility. I'm going to actually write these down. I'm going to write down.
information of self-care and wellness.
Sorry?
Information of self-care
of self-care and wellness overall.
and wellness. Self-care and wellness.
Self-care. Yeah, like mental health, for example.
I think that actually mental can be physical too, but yeah.
Mental and physical health as well, yes.
Anyone else have any thoughts? There's no right or wrong answers.
So all of the countries politically, I'll stand up.
Political messaging from all of the countries.
Political messaging from all of the countries.
Right. So you don't mean security, you mean messaging.
Like in the news, the things that are discussed in the news.
Disinformation.
Getting people to trust each other and showing
And just in science.
they're serious, that they're very serious about the economy too.
Scientists and trust scientific results and findings.
Yes. So maybe this trust of experts, which happened during COVID, for example. Okay. These are really good answers. Any other thoughts?
Sustainability. My perspective may be a little bit different, but it's the cost. You come from a family that's very poor, so you know the cost of living has become very expensive for us, and we can't really sustain our lives.
Yes, so maybe like inequality.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really important. Any other thoughts? Okay.
What people value, what people want in life. It's become now more about money and economics, and so instead of self-achievement, so the problem of the foundation of, it's a foundational problem, more like than political or greed. There's more greed than doing for each other.
Yesterday, Rain took me to we saw waterfalls. We went into the shop and I had t-shirts. And I took a photo of one of these t-shirts. I can't show you the photo, but I can read it out. It's addressing exactly your point. The t-shirt said the best things in life are not things.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're saying. I took a photo of the t-shirt. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Family.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, absolutely. Which is connected to the last one. So the next slide is just my answer to this question. If anyone else wants to say anything first.
Human rights.
Yeah. What? Sorry.
Morals. Oh. Morals and being kind, good character.
Yeah, I think that's connected to this one, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. America, the politics and the political divide.
Yeah, I wonder if that maybe even fits up.
I've got one last point, not only human rights, but also the rights of the earth, planet rights, animals, all species.
I was going to ask you about what about animals, so sorry, I'm losing.
Oh, I agree with what you were saying in the back here, so.
Which one? Yeah, no, not the personal, the point.
Oh, human rights, oh, earth,
Yeah.
and animal rights.
And right, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, you said something about politics. Yeah.
That was me over in the corner with the white shirt.
Yeah. Something else about politics. Yes.
Political and social divide in America.
Yeah, yes. So I'm going to put it under this one because it's, yeah. Especially in the USA. Yeah, that's, this country's crazy with that. Yeah. Okay, that's some really great answers. Shall I move on to what I wrote before hearing what you guys said?
Go ahead.
Well, what's more important, my answer? Nothing. I'm biased. But then I say, but of course many issues are equally or nearly as important. So I'm saying nothing's more important. And what have I said? Rich, poor, inequality, or being brought up. Domestic violence wasn't really mentioned, but we did, I think, have to talk about gender inequality, or maybe, did we touch on that? We talked about inequality for sure. Global and political conflict and security, we touched on this kind of theme. Living healthy, comfortable lives with support. You guys said access, support, kind of the same. So yeah, with support structure. So yeah, some of the same things, but you guys definitely had a few additional things that I hadn't thought of. So yeah, climate change is important. It's my field. There are other topics. We can do more than one at the same time, right? Of course we can. Okay, what's my next question? If you had to just think of three, what I call grand challenges for human society, the biggest and most urgent problems for human society, what would they be? You can only think of three. If you think one, that's fine too.
First would be climate change. Also, the danger of nuclear energy and war specifically. And third would be inequality.
Climate change, threat of nuclear war, and inequality.
Which kind of inequality?
General inequality, but specifically like first world versus third world inequality and issues. There's a huge divide.
Cool. What else? If you only have one or two, you don't have to have three.
Misinformation through social media, or misinformation overall.
Misinformation through social media and misinformation in general.
I agree. And you know, the thing about misinformation is we are learning that, you know, that apparently Russia and China have been very clever at feeding the Western world misinformation. It's like a new war, not fought with guns, but with social media, and it's like influencing our elections, not just in the US, in England as well. Apparently Russia had a big influence on our Brexit vote, which was, I would say Brexit was more disastrous than Trump. Yep.
One thing I would think of would be like a lot of people value short-term gain versus long-term gain. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for climate change specifically too. I think resources and finances are resources by the elite, sort of the hoarding of information and finances by the elite and by corporations.
Probably with that.
And I'm adding to that, I think that doesn't, you know, that starts with the $800 billion that's spent on the military every year too.
Yeah. So in I teach a class, a final year undergraduate class in England, which is called the Carbon Cycle and Climate Change. And one thing I show at the end of that class is how much it would cost to get the whole world off fossil fuels. And it's a big number, right? It's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. But then I show the next slide how much we spend on the military, or how much we spent in 2008 to rescue the banks, right? And these numbers are bigger than what we need for climate change. So if governments want to find the money, they can. But with respect to climate change, they don't want to. That's the truth. They won't tell you that, but that's the truth.
The first one I would say is global warming, climate change. The second is pollution. And the third would be moving to the next mass extinction, the 6 mass extinctions. I believe that we're losing a lot of biodiversity and will continue to. Yep.
Yeah. And by pollution, you probably mean atmosphere, water, all kinds. Yeah.
Everywhere, space.
Yeah. Yes.
It's beyond the atmosphere, land, water, everywhere.
Yeah. Plastic in the oceans. Yeah. So one thing about America is, but it's funny, I was reading the other day about why not many Americans actually go overseas, and relative to, in terms of percentage numbers relative to other countries, not many Americans actually travel. And the main reason given in this article I read just last weekend was safety. I'm like, in terms of the Western world, this is the least safe country you could be in. Yeah. And okay, you've got the FDA who approve almost anything, right? I mean, you have all these drugs here that do not exist in Europe. You can't even get melatonin in Europe. Food poisoning is so high in the US compared to in Europe. And we haven't even started talking about guns. You know, I mean, sorry, but this is not a safe country. Western rebels. And it's partly because of the influence of lobbying and not having regulations, right? And so many people in this country, they want their freedom, and that freedom means, you know, being allowed to take bleach to get rid of COVID. Right? Or having guns, the freedom to kill somebody else, I guess. You know, Trump can walk down Fifth Avenue, he said, and kill somebody. That's what he said. And whereas in Europe, we have a lot more laws, but many of them are to protect the people. And I think that people need protection. And it doesn't mean we're not free. And then when you come back to the inequality topic, right? If you're very poor, then I would say you're also not free. So what is the real definition of freedom? So yes, sorry, I'm getting carried away.
That's the point we're making anyway. Do we appreciate that?
Yeah. On one hand, it's interesting. So I lived in California when they went no smoking in restaurants. And they were not only the first state to do that, they were worldwide. California is one of the first. And I'm like, this is bizarre. Why are they setting actually a good regulation in this American country where I just said it doesn't usually do this? The reason is because it's suing. People were afraid of getting sued because of cancer. So sometimes suing actually has a positive benefit. Strangely enough.
I'm thinking in general, corporations, wealthy corporations spend more on renovating technology, expensive upgrades for things that people don't really need, without investing in green energy or prevention against climate change or issues with global warming. They spend it on other ways instead of spending on green infrastructure.
Yeah, like both my laptop and my phone, I can't change the battery, right? And batteries get worse. They're forcing you to buy a new one every 3 years. My old laptop, I could just put in a new battery, keep the same laptop. Same with my phone. So that's kind of, you know, we've been forced to upgrade all the time. So I agree. That's just one example, one small example of what we're saying. And then, you know, the thing about big companies is sometimes they pretend to do nice things. Like, look at Amazon. How many of you guys have heard of, it's gone now, but for many years, until a few months ago, there was a website called smile.amazon.com. You guys knew about that? And if you sign up for Smile, then 1% of your purchases goes to the charity of your choice, and you choose from a list. But so, I mean, I'm surprised that at least half of you knew that. All the people I talked to, like 5%, had heard of it. So A, they didn't advertise it. It was a great idea, but not many people knew about it. And B, they stopped it about 2 months ago. So they were pretending to do something nice, but then you hear about how Amazon treat their employees, you know. I mean, they're peeing into this because they can't take a bathroom break. And they can't take any sick leave or they'll lose their jobs. And let's not even start talking about Elon Musk. Anyway, any other thoughts until we show my answers to this question?
One thing. Needing to reduce dependency on fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Right now, the whole world is heavily dependent on fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry, whether that be oil, coal, and so on. So we really need to divert into not using fossil fuels because at some point they will run out.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's basically climate change. But let me just show you something. I'm going to watch the screen again. I'm going to do another F. Did you see that? Did you see? I'm going to do it again. I write this word so much. Oops, I didn't do it that time. Of course, you're watching. Ah. There we go.
Yeah, you're not the only one that happens to.
Fossil fuels. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's an old movie, maybe 20 years old now, called The Insider, with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And it's all about the tobacco industry and how when scientists first discovered that tobacco was addictive and causing cancer, the tobacco industry were trying to hide this and not let it become public. It's a really good movie showing this one journalist was trying to get the information out, and the tobacco industry, they basically broke up his family, he lost his life, it was awful. And it's a true story. And so I'm watching this movie and thinking, this is the tobacco industry. The fossil fuel industry has 100 times more money than the tobacco industry ever had. Of course they're doing exactly the same thing. And are so good at it, we don't even realize they're doing it. So it's kind of scary. Okay, here's my answers then. Yeah. So, something because I said all the same things. I've got climate change, sustainability, and biodiversity. So again, I'm very biased on the science, so I haven't mentioned the political issues, the human society issues that many of you have brought up. Not to say I don't think they're important, but just I'm giving my scientist perspective, I guess. And so climate change basically means we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. It should have happened decades ago, it's still not happening because of the fossil fuel industry. It's already the only reason they're so powerful. Sustainability is becoming more obvious to some people. When I come to this country, I think it's, well, not as a scientist, but as a person, I'm like, where's the recycling? You know, just walking around Rochester Airport with my drink bottle and there's only trash. How can an airport not have a recycling bin? Okay, I'm going to say, might look a little bit bad. I'm living in Rain's house right now, and I got up in the morning, in the weekend, oh, I'm a bit cold. So I put a sweater and some socks on. Then I found out they got air conditioning on. Bloody hell, you know, I'm putting more clothes on because I'm cold, and they got these, you know, and she's a scientist. Oops, you guys know that. She blamed her husband. So we turned it up. Next day it was down again. If you go to Europe and you look at fossil fuel emissions, there's a big seasonal cycle because Europe does not have air conditioning. So we're using all our energy in the wintertime for heating and not in summer. In America, there's not a seasonal cycle because you're using air conditioning in the summer and heating in the winter. And you're sure, some parts of America does get hotter than Europe, but not all parts. So, and some people have the temperature set point in summer lower, so spending more energy for a lower value, and in the winter they have a higher value, spending energy for high values. Like, could it be the same number the whole year? So I don't see much recycling here. I see huge energy wastage, energy consumption in America compared to anywhere else. And it just becomes second nature. You live in it, and then until you visit another country, you don't realize that actually it could be different and still may be okay. And biodiversity is one that my university is starting to get into in a big way. I personally don't know much about it, but the little things I do hear, it sounds really scary. But for example, we need bees to pollinate our crops. And the bee population in England is half of what it was 10 years ago. I don't know what's going on in America, but... And then, okay, one way to help climate change is more trees. Because trees suck up carbon dioxide. So, okay, let's plant lots of trees, but if we plant trees, it's just only one species, right? Plant a whole field with one species of pine trees because they grow quickly. But then we will destroy the biodiversity. So, it's like, you know, it's very complicated. Solve one problem, make another problem worse. So I think the answer is we have to be aware of all of the problems so that we find the right solutions. And going back to fossil fuels, yes, we must get off fossil fuels as fast as possible, but there are wrong ways to do this. We're trying to move to electric cars. If we do it in the wrong way, it will be a disaster. We need the infrastructure for charging points. We need more electricity. Where's it going to come from? What's happening in England already is people who are buying electric cars are buying bigger cars because they don't need to fill it up with gas, right? But a bigger car takes more natural resources. And the batteries are using rare metals that are coming from Africa, which is using human slavery to produce those metals to go into the batteries in your electric car. So it's a very complicated problem. It's not, it's not a simple solution for anything. How many time?
Yeah, we're trying to say we have like about 8 minutes left. So I'm going to keep going, and then we'll forward a few more minutes, but roughly about 8 minutes left.
Okay, cool. We'll go a little bit faster.
Okay. Yeah.
So my next question was, what do you think are the grand challenges for America? Same as before or different? If different, why? So in the interest of doing this quickly, shall I just move on straight to my thoughts and then have you guys say what you think about? I'll give my answers first and then you. Maybe it goes quicker. So my answer is reduce per capita fossil fuel emissions, international leadership, otherwise the same as before. And then I said the US has a poor track record on what is needed. The US almost never signs up to international treaties because they think they're better than everybody else. Very poor record in animal rights. Now that we had Brexit in the UK, oh, we can get food from America. And the English were like, no, because American food, we have chlorinated chicken, we have beef with hormones. English people are like, absolutely not. We have veal. Veal is illegal in the UK because of the way it treats the cows to make veal. So animal rights is a much bigger issue in England than it is in America. And non-sustainable lifestyle we've been talking about already. I want to come back to the first one, per capita fossil fuel emissions, and so far there's been no numbers, right? I'm a scientist, I look with numbers. So check this out. This is showing per capita fossil CO2 emissions from the main countries from 1960 to 2021 in tons of CO2. The USA is the yellow one at the top. And the number in 2021 is 15 tons of CO2 per person per year. The next, Russia is also not good, but Russia has a much smaller population, and you know, Russia is not known to be good at anything, apart from running wars. Then Japan is pretty bad. That's partly because they don't have nuclear power anymore since their earthquake. And they're a very small island with a lot of people. Then China. And then European Union. The European Union number is 6. America is 15. So every American person is using way more than double the fossil fuel emissions as every European person. Is that really necessary? Yes. Some places are hotter and you want some air conditioning, but I'm sorry, you go to the south of Spain, it's 50 Celsius. It's 110 degrees in the south of Spain and they don't have air conditioning. So really, if Europeans can live like this, why can't Americans bring that number down? And it's an enormous population here, over 300 million people. What about China? You might think that's interesting. China's actually worse than Europe. Still much less than the USA, but worse than Europe. There's something unusual about that number. The big reason why the Chinese number is so high is because they're making stuff for us. They're making products which burns fossil fuel emissions, and we are the ones buying them. They sell them to us. So they're satisfying a demand from the Western society which puts up their per capita emissions. But if you only looked at the emissions of the Chinese people, that number would be a lot lower. So that's one thing. I mean, America is just way up there compared to all the other major industries. And the second point I want to make is what I call cumulative fossil fuel emissions. Here USA is at the top. It's a total amount of CO2 emitted since 1850. Why is that important? Because the CO2 that we emitted in 1850, half of it is still in the atmosphere today. And every molecule of CO2 in the atmosphere is causing climate change. So the historical emissions are really, really important because CO2 has a very long lifetime in the atmosphere. So if you think about all the emissions over time, the USA is again number 1, and then comes Europe. And China is catching up, but it's actually significantly less than Europe and America. So any thoughts on that in our last 2 minutes? No. Yeah.
Can you tell me more about Europe and where the historical one? Can you show the historical slide and talk about that?
Europe includes 26 countries.
So that's all 26 countries of Europe, correct?
27. It used to be 28 until Brexit, so UK is now separate. The UK number is actually quite high because we're a small country. The reason UK is so high is because we started fossil fuels. For more than 50 years, fossil fuels were only in the UK, which is where we get the British Empire from. The British Empire existed because we started with coal mining and industrial revolution. Then the rest of the world started catching up, so the UK actually has a big number. To answer your question though, so what exactly is your question about Europe?
I'm just trying to understand why Europe would be producing more CO2, and with the UK being so small, I couldn't figure out why those lines were
Okay, right.
So I'm trying to figure out why that's less. So because Europe, you think, would be bigger.
The total population of Europe is very similar to America. We just use less energy. More public transport, no AC, I mean a lot more public transport. We don't have the same consumerism and capitalist culture. I mean, we have it, but not as much as America.